name is Tommy Lozure. I am the Music Production Department Chair at Visible Music College. And today I'm going to show you some of the basics of the live loops function in Logic Pro X. So let's jump right into it. What you're seeing here on the screen in front of you is one of the starter grids from Logic Pro 10. I chose to use one of the starter grids because it's already pre-populated with a bunch of content, so it gives us something to work with. But you can start this from scratch and you can build all this up on your own. But what we have here is some tracks already built in, some scenes already built in, some cells already pre-populated. We'll talk about all that terminology in just a moment. This specific one is called Edges and Angles, and so if you want to check it out, it is part of those starter grids when you open up your templates in Logic. I really like this one, so that's why I chose to have this one to demonstrate with. So let's talk really briefly about what live loops does for you in Logic. And so the kind of biggest thing here, this is a non-linear arrangement method of working with your music and your content in Logic. What that means is that you have all of your different musical ideas here separated into what they call cells and scenes that you can trigger back at essentially any time you want to, in sync with your tempo and playing together. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility to experiment with arrangements, to experiment with ideas, and even record the output of what your experimentation is. It also, if you're familiar with Ableton Live, gives you some ability to use Logic in a live setting as well to trigger back different loops and samples and whole arrangements for the purpose of live playback. And so if that's something that you've always been jealous of from Ableton Live, hadn't had access to as easily as a Logic user, this is going to get you a lot more access to that. Your live loops are compatible with all of your different track types. So for this specific example, you'll see most of these over here are audio tracks. I'll open up our inspector here so we can see all of our different track types over here. There is one instrument track in here. We'll look at that a little bit as well. This guy right here using an Alchemy instrument. We'll play with those, but it's compatible with your instrument tracks, your audio tracks, and even the drummer track in Logic. And so anything that you're using on a regular basis to compose in Logic, you'll be able to add that into your live loops grid. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest strengths of this is it's automatically going to sync to your tempo. And so right now in this session, our tempo is set to 180. Everything we're triggering back is going to be playing back at 180 BPM. It's going to stay in sync as I'm switching from cells or scenes to play back different elements of this arrangement, keeping everything in time, keeping that groove solid, which is a really cool aspect of this. So let's talk about the interface we're looking at here. If you're new to this, this is different than your standard tracks area in Logic. And so first of all, you access your live loops grid view via this button up here. That is the show hide your live loops grid. The button right next to that is to show or hide your tracks area. And so this is the tracks area that you're probably familiar with in Logic. Click on that. You can actually see both of them together at the same time. And that's important because these are complementary to each other. These are not competing with each other, but they do approach how we work in Logic fundamentally differently. Your tracks area that you are used to has a timeline here across the top, and your playback goes from left to right in a linear fashion. As I mentioned with your live loops, we're working non-linearly here, so there's not a timeline up here. But if you keep both of these open at the same time, what you will see is as you are playing loops over here, your timeline will actually be progressing over here in your tracks area. And so they are linked together, though that's not how you're going to look at it in the live grid view. You're also going to see all of these colored blocks. These colored blocks are called cells. These are the actual musical content. This can be audio files, these can be MIDI regions or step sequencer regions, these can be drummer regions. Whatever you're used to working with in Logic exists here, just exists in a little bit different way. Instead of regions, they're called cells, and they're all going to loop. And so that's why when you look at each of these cells, the kind of graphical representation of the content, an audio file or a MIDI region, is going to be in a circle to indicate the fact that these are going to be looping elements. And everything in here, as the name live loops insinuates, is going to be built around loops. Each of these columns that contain cells is called a scene. And you can see those down here across the bottom. Right now they're just numbered, but you can right click on these to name them. And so if you'd rather name them for your arrangement sections, your intro, your build, your drop, whatever it is, you can name those scenes to represent that for you. We'll keep it with the numbers right now, but you'll kind of hear the different arrangement as we start playing with this. So that's the basics of your interface. Let's dive a little bit deeper into these cells. So like I said, you can have cells of audio regions, of MIDI regions, and of drummer regions. I have 2 of those types loaded up into this one. And so most of these are audio. And so let me, what I'll do here is I'll zoom in really close on one of these. Let me just make this track really big so you can really see this. And we'll zoom in here a little bit closer as well. And so what you'll see is the graphical representation here is our waveform like you would see on a standard audio region. Except that waveform is twisted into a circle, and so you get the idea of the loop here. And so if I click play on this, you see the progression of that as it goes around. And so you get that visual representation of playback like we're used to in our standard tracks area, but it's going to be per cell, and it's going to show you what type of cell that is. Likewise, let me come down here to our Alchemy lead track, and what you'll see here is a similar thing, except this is an instrument track, and so this is a MIDI region, not an audio region, and so you see the MIDI data around here. But same thing as this plays back, you can see that the playback aligns to those notes as it's playing around. And so you get the same feel. Let me stop that one more time. One little struggle I have with live loops, I'll show you here in a little bit, is syncing, stopping, and playback. But that'll show you that visual representation of that track type or that region type and what it's doing in time. Populating these cells is really easy. The probably most basic way you're going to do this is just to drag and drop. And so if you have content over here in your tracks area, you can just drag a region and drop it over here and it'll populate a cell for you. Let me just really quickly, I can demonstrate this for you. I'm going to grab just some random audio loop here, drop it on a file, and then click and drag that over here so you can see how easily that populates. And so I just drug that in. It's there. It's now part of our live loops. Now, it's probably going to sound terrible in context, and so I'm not actually going to play that back. But it's literally just drag and drop, and you can align those, and it's really easy. Same idea with MIDI regions. Drag and drop them over. That goes the other way as well. You can also right-click on these and add an audio file or create a cell or record directly into a cell. And I'll tell you about the recording into a cell a little bit later. But that's how you get content into these cells, how you populate these cells with the content that you want to play back. So once you have content in here, you want to start setting up your arrangement, and that's where you're going to use scenes. That's what we see here across the bottom. Again, each one of these columns is a scene. And so you can start building your arrangement really however you want here. You don't have to build it in your logical structure of a song like you're used to, because you're going to trigger these back at whatever time you want. It doesn't play back linearly. And so you don't have to go intro, verse, chorus, bridge, whatever you typically do. You can have 2 or 3 different intro ideas, and you could populate 3 different scenes right at the beginning for those 3 different intros, and you can play around with them and see which one you like, which one vibes a little bit better with your song or whatever it is. And so it's really up to you how you want to build these scenes. But you can put a collection of cells into a scene, and then you can trigger them all back together. The one limitation you have here, obviously, is you only get 1 cell per track per scene, and so you can't put 2 of this beach track here. You could always just copy that beach track and have 2 of them, and that's an easy fix to that. But by default, you can only have 1 cell per scene per track. That makes sense, hopefully. So these are numbered by default, but you can right-click on them to change the name. And so if you want to rename that, that's easy. You can delete them here. You can insert an empty scene. You can click and drag on them to move them around. Again, it's all about flexibility here. So now you've got cells, now you've got scenes, let's talk about playback. So if you just want to play back a cell, just click on it. There's a little play button right in the middle, and that'll start that playback. So this is playing back now. I can add this beat into it. And you'll hear the beat waited until the top of that bar to start playing back, so that it would be in time. All right, so I'm going to stop that. We're We're going to reset this, re-cue. Queuing is something that you're going to be doing here. And now, instead of triggering those independently, I'm going to trigger them together by clicking this arrow down here on the scene. And so now when I click that, both of those cells will play back together. And now if I want to move on to the next scene, I just click on that. Same thing, if I want to progress to the next one, click on that arrow again. Pretty straightforward. You can just go all the way through your arrangement, or you can jump around your arrangement. So you don't have to go 1, 2, 3. You can go 1, 3, 2. You can do whatever you want with it. Again, that's the kind of brilliance of the non-linear format of this. And so it's easy just to click and have those play back that way. But the other really powerful thing you can do in here is you can queue up scenes or cells. And so the way you do that, instead of clicking on the play, if you select some cells, and I'll show you this process, I'll select cells across different scenes. That's one of the brilliant things here, so they don't have to be part of the same scene. I'll click this one, I'm going to shift click on this one, shift click on this one, shift click on this one. So now I have 4 different cells that I have selected. If I go in here and right click on them or press Option Return, I can queue these cells for playback. And what you'll notice is they'll all start flashing now. Those 4 cells that I selected all start flashing. If I click on play on one of those cells, it will trigger back those 4 cells because those 4 cells are queued. If I wanted to add to this, I can hold down Shift and select a couple of more, and then Option Return to queue them up, and then hit play. And so now that added that vocal line in here, I can add this kind of rising transition part. And I can do this same thing to a scene. And so if I click on a scene, I can hit Option Return and cue the whole thing up. And so that's really, really powerful that you can trigger any different part of this at any time you want. Now you'll notice I keep coming to this stop button down here in the right corner. And the reason for that is that will clear out whatever I have queued. And so it's a little different workflow where you're not just hitting space bar all the time. And that's a place that I struggle, and you'll hear me mess that up a couple of times. But that will clear your queue and let you start afresh with things that you don't have, where you don't have things queued up. While you're in playback, if you want to take anything out of the queue, you just click off of it, deselect it, and then select something else to queue up, and it'll take out whatever was previously in the queue for you. So that's a basic idea of playback. You can play back scenes, you can play back cells independently, you can play back cells from different scenes. Again, non-linear, tons of flexibility, gives you lots of options. But one of the really, really important parts of this is this Quantize Start option up here. This is what determines when things play back while you're playing it. So right now, I have my Quantize Start set to 1 bar. But if you listen to this track, the tempo here is 180. The playback is actually at halftime. And so it plays back like it's at 90 BPM. And so the 1 bar actually doesn't feel very good to me. So I'm going to set this Quantize Start time to 2 bars. What you'll notice is there's a little circle here, kind of looks like a clock with that line going around it. This is going to be my visual key to when transitions are going to happen. And so if I click on scene 1, I'll do this here in just a second, and then click on scene 2, it won't start the playback of scene 2 until this little circle here completes its full transition, that full time around. So let me hit scene 1, and you can watch here the circles start going. And so it's always going to trigger new things at the top of this. And you can feel this is kind of a 4-bar groove on this piano. So bar 2, bar 3, and now is when I'd want to transition. So right here, anytime before the top of that next measure, it transitions over. You can see each cell has its own little circle, its own little clock that you can watch how long it takes for it to get to the end of its loop. And these are independent from each other. And so this one here is just like 1 or 2 bars long. This one here is longer. You can see this over here on the right-hand side as well for each one of these. It's kind of a handy visual reference so that you know kind of when a transition makes sense. So this piano here looks like the longest one. So I'm going to watch this circle here in time with this circle for when I want to transition to the next scene. And that gives us a smooth transition. And you can do that with whatever cells individually. You can click on them and set their own quantized start time. You can do that with scenes. You can go down here and set what those quantized start times are. So again, you have the global option, but you can do this individually as well, which is a cool feature. So if you have one cell or one scene, that would make more sense to have a quantized start time at 1 bar instead of 2 bars for transition purposes. You can do that. You don't have to have everything on 2 bars. But for right now, globally, everything's working off of 2 bars here. All right, quickly, let me show you how you can record into these cells, be it an audio cell, an instrument cell. It works basically the same way. And so one way you can do it is just right-click on a blank cell, and you get a few different options. This is an audio track, and so it gives you an option to add an audio file, which would be an import option, create a blank cell, or record directly into the cell. If you choose record into the cell, it's going to use whatever your interface is that you have plugged into your computer, whatever that input is, just like your standard recording. And then you can record into that utilizing your click up here, a count in if you wanted to, listening to the groove that's a part of that scene. You can record right into it. And then once you get it recorded, you can open it up in your track editor to edit it. So you could trim off any excess audio, make sure the transients and the smart tempo line up properly. Logic usually does a pretty good job of that, but you may need to tweak it. You can also go in here and change your loop start position. And so I can change where things are looping. And so I can make my loop, say, just 1 bar long, but I could have it actually start here at the beginning. And so the loop is this bar here at the top. Sorry, let me stop that. And then this little blue arrow here, I can click and drag that back, is where the actual region or cell in this case would start at. And so if I trigger this cell back now, it'll start at bar 1, but it'll only loop bar 2. You'll see as it goes through there, only looping bar 2. So you have a lot of flexibility to set that up however you want to set that up for whatever you record in, or honestly for whatever you import in or whatever you already have as part of your live loop setup here. Let me undo that back so we get back to our starting place. Same thing here applies to if you're wanting to record into a MIDI cell. You can create either a blank MIDI cell, which is going to be a piano roll cell. If I open that up and double click on it, it's just our standard piano roll like you see in Logic. Or, let me delete that and create a pattern cell. Double click on that. This uses the step sequencer. And so you can go in here and create rhythmic playback based off of your step sequencer, which is powerful. So this is kind of cool, right? And you can go back and obviously play with that a lot more and do a lot of interesting things with that. Or, let me delete this one more time. You can right click here and you can record directly into a cell. So using your MIDI controller you have connected to your computer or your musical typing here, you can do that. And then once you have it recorded in, just like with your audio, double click on it, opens it in your editor, and you can go in here and edit it with the piano roll editor, with your step sequencer. You have these same loop options up here with your MIDI tracks, and so you can set your loops to be wherever you want. So again, gives you a lot of power there. One last thing I'll show you, once you've got everything in here where you want it to be, you may want to make an actual arrangement out of it. And so you can record from your live loops grid over here into your tracks area over here. And so what I'll do is make sure this is starting back here at the beginning. And I'll give us a count off here to come in. And what you need to do is hit this button right here. This top left corner of your live loops grid is called Enabled Performance Recording. Select that, hit record. Now whatever I'm triggering over here is going to record over here into our tracks area on these tracks. And so it will record audio information or MIDI information based off of whatever's playing in your live loop. All right, so let me hit record. And I'll go to scene 2 next. This time I'll queue up a couple of different cells from a few different places. And now I'll trigger them. I'll queue up just this noise riser here because it's kind of a nice transition piece. And then once that finishes, we'll go over here, say to cells or scene 7. And then we'll get to the end of this progression and kind of do the outro here. And there we go. We recorded from our live loops grid over here into our tracks area. Now you'll notice everything in our tracks area is grayed out. And the reason for that is you can only have either your live loops grid area or your tracks area active at any given time. And that's what this dividing bar here is showing us. Whatever direction this arrow is pointing is telling us which side is active. Right now, our live loops are active all the way down. If I click this button here at the top, it'll globally shift that over to our tracks area being active over here. You can do this independently by track as well. And so you could have a handful of tracks active on your live loops and a handful of tracks active in your tracks area. Again, just gives you tons of flexibility. But now let me close our live loops grid, go back to our standard tracks area, and you can see how everything recorded directly in over here in audio regions, MIDI regions, just like you would expect recording anything else into Logic. It's a really, really cool feature. I can hit play now at any point in this. I can edit that, chop it up, move it around, everything else. And so that's hopefully a good intro into the basics of how live loops works. It goes a ton deeper than that. It's a really, really cool feature. So spend some time playing with it. I think you'll really, really enjoy it.